we live in the age of the culture war, as you know. I suppose there are always culture wars going on throughout history. We're certainly living through one. And when people think of it, they frequently characterize it as a battle between the left and the right, or liberals and conservatives, as people will call them. You have a different idea about the nature of the culture war, Sebastian, and you argue that actually it's more about an internecine rivalry on the left. What's that about?
Yeah, so I mean, as you're pointing towards, I think if you look at the only effective sort of cases of the culture war being successfully waged by the dissident side of things. So if you think about, for example, I don't know if you know, in Cambridge, Arif Ahmed was able to lead an effort to secure free speech. Or if you think about things like the recent Cass review, that's based on years of campaigning by especially gender critical feminists on trans issues. Those are examples of successful culture wars. And I think the most successful, the most hotly fought culture wars are very much between old guard liberals, the old left, and the new liberal left. So again, the both liberal left on both sides. And I don't think actual conservatism, especially in this country, gets much of a look in, or even socialism or anything like that. Things only seem to work if they're fought on liberal lines, and I don't raise these efforts in a slighting way at all, because I think they're both very important issues, and I think the people who are fighting these efforts are, in a way, they're doing a lot better than those of us who aren't left liberals. So, if you look at the sort of the radical feminists who've pushed back on trans issues, I mean, you look at the level of solidarity, the enthusiasm, and a kind of religious zeal. And I think that sort of zeal, you really only see it on the left now. I don't think you see it. I don't think you see it amongst conservatives.
Why do you think that is?
So, I think part of the problem is that it's exactly the dominance of the centre-right. Is that this is not a group of people who, I think you could almost define someone at the centre-right as being people who don't like ideology and don't like passion and don't like fanaticism. And in the way that can be admirable, sort of enlightened, tolerant sort of attitude. But I think when it lacks a kind of strong rootedness, as I think old liberals had, especially, if you think about sort of the root of liberal Christianity in this country, Methodism, that kind of thing, it's very, very rooted in a passionate sense of what the human life should be. And I think people on the left have an idea of what the human life should be. You may not agree with it, but they've got one and they're willing to fight for it. And I think that's a real lesson for those people who don't like, people who either on the left or the right who don't consider themselves liberals. They need to think very strongly about what they're willing to sort of fight for, what they're willing to articulate. Because I think if you just fight negative battles, you end up losing.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier when you were talking about the French Revolution, how people were ignited by their passions, and I can't remember who it was. I mean, it wasn't their research, but I can't remember who it was that I'd read it secondhand from, whether it was Rob Henderson or Jonathan Haidt. But they talk about the different psychological profile of those who are typically on the left and those who are on the right. And those who are on the right basically don't hate their opponents. They don't see them as evil people. They see them as misguided or mistaken, and they get annoyed about things like, God, here we go. Whereas, and this isn't everyone on the left clearly, but you can see the othering of their political opponents, who they see as enemies and as evil people and beyond the pale. And you see that language coming through. I wonder if that's partly it as well, as because of the nature of the psychological profile, you're just way less likely to go and pick up your placards and standing out of a building if you're to right of the centre.
Well, there may be something in it, because I'm very much I'm cheerfully judgmental and moralistic, and I'm of course a man of the left. At least I would, there's a universe in which I'd be editing a left-wing publication, but it's not the one we live in. And I think one of the reasons I've ended up where I've ended up is because, I like ideas. I like ideology. I like passion. I don't. I think it's possible to have political passion and a kind of religious sense of politics
Hmm.
without hating your opponents. But I think it's very hard to do that if you're not religious. So I think part of the problem is that it's easy to be a Christian socialist and love your enemy. I think it's a lot harder to be a secular socialist and love your enemy. Especially if you're expecting an imminent paradise in the way that a lot of Marxists do. And I think that's sort of where we get into trouble.
Yeah.
That we're not. That, you need a moral concern in politics. You need an ideal, but you also need a healthy sense of that ideal is always going to rely beyond politics ultimately.
Yeah, you touched a bit on these ideals that are typically held by those on the left or left liberals. You've talked about they have this vision of what a human life is, and I suppose some of those are self-expression, the achievement of your own desire above all else. That's the main thing, and trying to think of what else there is. But what's I think we typically know what drives those people that are on the left. And if you're thinking about what is it that's going to animate those people who don't occupy that worldview, what do you think would have been the vision of the human life, and what's important for those who are typically more of a conservative mindset that you think we've lost and aren't part of the conversation because they're dismissed and that they should be part of the conversation?
Well, again, I think it's sort of quite important. I think in the past, when there's been political vision in this country, there's been a division over shared goods and ideals. So I think, obviously, that the left, what it wants is social justice, equality, liberty, all of these really quite important things. But I think in the past they would have known that to get those things, you need things like duty, personal responsibility, reciprocity, sort of conservative values and left. If you want to call them one a left-wing value and one a conservative value, you sort of need both to get at it. And you might disagree about where the emphasis should be, and whether perhaps it's better to have a situation in which we leave more to personal responsibility, or you leave more to the state, or more to, you can have your differences of emphasis. But what we're seeing is a situation, and I think at least when it comes to sort of a radical progressive left, where they think you can have equality without duty or responsibility. They think you can have social justice without policing. And I don't think the result of that kind of politics is going to be police out or prison abolition, but it could easily be a situation in which we run the police and the prisons very badly. And it could be a situation in which you can't speak honestly about social problems. And I think I think almost that's the biggest problem of it all. It's the inability to speak clearly, honestly, and critically, and be friends afterwards. And I think that sort of thing relies on a sort of trust and a set of shared values that we've lost. I don't know how we get back to them,